Naofumi Iwatani, he was always seen as a rather intelligent fellow, but he also had a pretty weird interest, this being an interest in the afterlife. For some reason, Naofumi was always fascinated with the idea of there being an afterlife, there being ghosts, to the point where he would even try to do research on them many times throughout his childhood. For some reason, he would always find himself watching these sort of mythical monster hunts, or like these ghost specters, or whatever you wanted to call them, really. His parents found it to be a bit weird, but they decided to let him do whatever for the most part. It was only when he made it into college that there was an issue, though, with his hobby. You see, what ended up happening was that Naofumi went on to do an even deeper sort of research, literally creating a device of the sorts in order to test out a theory, this being that the afterlife was another realm, and he was trying to tap into this other realm. But what Naofumi was not expecting, though, was for there to be a malfunction of sorts. This malfunction would blow up in his face. His whole device would end up messing with his DNA, actually, to the point where when he woke up, he realized that something was very, very odd about him. This being that it was as if his whole body had been wiped in a way. For some reason, his hair was white, his eyes, they glowed green for some reason. Not green, but blue. Greenish blue, you could say. But none of this really made sense to Naofumi. It was until later on that he realized that he had actually become a ghost of the sorts, or half ghost at the very least. Naofumi decided to use his powers for good, at least for a couple of years, that is. Naofumi figured that he could maybe be the very first superhero within this world. A real superhero, not no police officer or firefighter, no. Although yeah, they were heroes in a way. Naofumi was referring to one of those comic book sort of superheroes, the people with special abilities, superpowers, people that could fly, shoot laser beams, that kind of superhero. And Naofumi, he generally tried to keep up to this role for a couple of years, but things just continued to get worse. For some reason, it was a down spiral. His grades, they were getting worse as the years went by. He was becoming more and more distant towards his parents. They would often try to call him, try and see what was happening to him. Why was he starting to become more distant towards them? And the reason why Naofumi was actually becoming more distant was because of the constant mention of his grades, why he was performing so poorly in school, so poorly in college, to the point where when they actually tried to visit him, the dean would even try to contact them, mentioning how Naofumi was actually doing pretty terrible. The fact that the dean had to contact his parents, of all people, instead of just Naofumi, was saying a lot. And then Naofumi, he was really just playing superhero. Naofumi also ended up encountering many vile acts throughout the first couple of years as being a superhero, to the point he realized that this world was pretty vile. Naofumi's parents, they would try to argue with him one day about his decisions, and Naofumi, he would have just had enough. He would have accidentally revealed his powers to his parents, but in the worst way imaginable. Naofumi just couldn't take the frustration any longer, and then he accidentally shot them. He accidentally killed his own parents by blasting laser beams through their chests. His parents say were shocked, but the life in their eyes, it would immediately just disappear right after. Naofumi, he couldn't believe what just happened. This couldn't happen. Naofumi would try and do the very best in order to make sure that they were alive, but it was already too late. He already killed them. Naofumi was a murderer. Naofumi didn't know how to take this, and he just could not take any of it any longer. Naofumi had realized he had made a grave mistake and he could not reverse it. Time would just move on, but Naofumi, he couldn't stop thinking about it until he ended up developing his own split personality of sorts. A more strong personality, you could say. Whenever he became his ghost self, he would adopt the personality where it was done. He was more, well, not more, but less caring towards others. He would try and get the job done no matter how bad he had to act in order to get it done. If he had to go through one person, he would have to do it. If it meant that he could save a town, he would kill one person, even if that person was innocent. Many people, they did not respect Naofumi for this, but Naofumi, he would continue to grow to be less and less caring. He saw the world as pretty vile after all, and the fact that he was helping them in the first place was already saying a lot. Naofumi would eventually decide that this world did not deserve him. This world needed to be purified. And in order to be purified, it needed fear. Naofumi was going to become this world's boogeyman if it meant to bring this world to peace or whatever. Actually, Naofumi didn't even really care about peace at this point. He just cared about the fact that these people, they were trying to use him and then criticize him every single moment, every single time. Naofumi just wasn't about that life anymore. He had killed his own parents and he had tried to shut down his emotions afterwards, but it was a struggle each and every time. It was a struggle to even just get up out of bed in the morning sometimes, and he realized that his humanity was weak. It was the main thing holding him back in life. Humanity. His humanity, his emotions, they were the main things holding him back from reaching his true potential. And now for me, he just couldn't believe it when he reached that epiphany and noticed the people always spreading hate about Naofumi. Naofumi realized that it would probably be best at this point to actually adopt this hate, adopt this sign that people were always referring to him as this no good person, this no good being who only cared about themselves. Yeah, Naofumi actually liked that idea, and next thing you know, Naofumi would actually go on to terrorize his whole world, becoming the greatest boogeyman that the world had ever seen. He would cause mass destruction all across the world. Nobody could really harm Naofumi either. People were trying to invent technology in order to protect themselves against Naofumi, and although they were successful for a time, Naofumi would actually manage to develop even more abilities as time went on. And one of his strongest abilities was the ghostly wail. But before he could even properly use it, well, while he was destroying one of the world's last remaining cities, something would actually happen, an explosion of sorts. And Naofumi would actually get caught in this explosion, although he would try to become intangible in order to get away from being harmed by this explosion. Naofumi would realize that he was getting teleported instead. Once Naofumi opened up his eyes, when he opened up his eyes, he would have realized that he was in a completely different area. He would be confused and question just what was going on. He would look around the area and notice 3 other people standing right next to him. One had a sword, one had a spear, and the last one, well, they had a bow. Each of them had gems within their weapons, and they were all equally confused as to where they were. Naofumi would try to ask a couple of questions, but when it came on to the priests, they would mention how they were the great 4 heroes, the great cardinal heroes, or whatever mumbo jumbo that priest was saying. They also wanted these guys to apparently protect their world from the waves. Naofumi was confused. What was this guy talking about? Naofumi would try to demand an answer out of this person, but some knights would appear, requesting that the 4 boys actually meet with the king. The king would apparently explain everything to them, and that was exactly what the king would do. The king would mention how there were apparently waves in this world where, you apparently end up having to fight these monsters. These monsters could apparently terrorize villages, and these monsters actually appeared in the last wave. This was the reason why the king decided to summon these 4 heroes here in order to protect them against the waves, especially with the boss monsters as well, since those were usually the strongest, and his people, they were just barely able to survive the last wave. Naofumi would hear all of this and he would kind of chuckle. The fact that these people thought he was going to be their hero. Why would he? Why would Naofumi want to become a hero for a completely other world? Some world that he was summoned into out of not even his free will. He was forced to be here. He was forcefully summoned here, and his logic was that if he wasn't going to protect his own world, why should he protect a stranger's own? You see the logic he was going with? Why would Naofumi want to help this guy? Although the king would mention how you could have like all these wishes and whatever, Naofumi did not care. Naofumi did not care about the money or anything. He could probably just get that whenever he wanted, really, with his abilities. Nobody could touch him, for crying out loud. Naofumi was strong. He was a monster, according to the many people from his world. But when looking at his stats while the king was talking, Naofumi would notice something odd. He was level 1 for some reason. His abilities, quite a few of them were locked. His main abilities that he could only use for right now were the fact that he could fly, he could disappear technically, more like just become intangible, and that he could possess people. Well, this and the ability to shoot laser beams from his hands as well, or energy beams, whatever you would prefer to call them as. He still had his ectoblast, so those were pretty good. That was pretty convenient, but he could tell that they weren't going to be at the same level as they were back in his old world. Naofumi realized that he would actually have to train in order to unlock the rest of his abilities, and that was annoying to him. The fact that he actually kind of had to work with these heroes, these people, if he wanted to get anything done. The king would ask for everybody's names, and when it came on to Naofumi, the king would actually be kind of confused, requesting to know more about Naofumi. He expected for the shield hero to be here after all, but Naofumi was in place of him, and As far as the king could tell, he had no weapon. What was up with that? Naofumi, he honestly couldn't tell the king either. He didn't know why he didn't have a weapon like the rest of the heroes. But when it came on to Naofumi though, he just did not care about anything still. Naofumi would try to tell the king that he had the ability to, well, become a... No, he wouldn't actually tell the king that he could technically become a ghost. Rather, Naofumi would just say that he had his own sort of abilities that the king would soon find out about. Naofumi was going to keep his abilities a secret for now. He wanted to test them out. He wanted to test them out for right now, after all. He wanted to figure out what was the full extent of his abilities before he sounded like a fool in front of the king, and giving him false expectations. The king would shrug and allow this to happen, allow for Naofumi to withhold this sort of information for right now. After all, as long as this kid helped him in the waves, that's all that really mattered in his opinion. The next day, the heroes would end up getting their own selection of people, and where Naofumi, he wouldn't get anybody. And Naofumi was completely content with that. He didn't really want to work with anybody of this world. Naofumi just wanted to train, get stronger, and then probably take over this world. Or maybe make the waves seem like a joke in comparison. Naofumi had stopped caring about humanity a long time ago, and he wasn't going to start caring about them again anytime soon. After all, humanity was the main reason why he became like this. Humanity was the main reason why he became a villain. The main reason why he became evil was because of the fact that people would always try to give him a bad rep, despite the fact that he was trying to do the best that he could in order to protect the people. But apparently his methods, they were seen as no good. But what could these people do? And Naofumi figured that this world wasn't going to be any different. He would just see how evil this world was going to be throughout his training, wasn't he? Sure enough, Naofumi was right. These people, they were going to die. He already knew from day one. Once he actually went out on his own, Naofumi, he would end up attacking some monsters, some fairly weak monsters that were basically balloons, and although they gave very little experience, then again, he was at level 1, so it wouldn't take long for him to upgrade or go on to higher levels so he could face stronger monsters. His abilities, they were slowly unlocking as well. More and more effective abilities. Naofumi would even realize that he was going to regain some of his pyrokinetic abilities as well. Naofumi, he would go on to kill some more monsters. These monsters, although they were a bit stronger than the balloon monsters, they still weren't really all that to par with what Naofumi was used to, and where he would be fighting whole militaries back in his old world, back when he was at the very top. But right now he had to start from the bottom and work his way back up once again. Naofumi would be pretty annoyed, but he would settle for this. By the time he got bored, he would have been around level 6. This was just Naofumi being bored. He was just doing this to kill time. Killing all of these monsters was pretty monotonous to Naofumi. He didn't even really have a need for armor. He could easily, Naofumi could easily just phase through most people's attacks. After all, he doubted that this world had anything that could counter his intangibility. And that's exactly what Naofumi would be focusing most of his efforts on. Intangibility and possessing people as well, since that was going to be a whole lot more fun. When Naofumi ended up realizing that this world was pretty terrible though. It was in the middle of night when Naofumi managed to collect quite a bit of money, and quite a bit of money off of selling monster pelts to people. And Naofumi, he would also go ahead and just try to relax for a while at a pretty old motel, you could say. He would just hang at a motel for the night, and some bandits or thugs, you could say, they would actually try to come up to Naofumi. They would make a request saying, hey, you should definitely have us become part of your party. And these guys already knew that Naofumi didn't have a weapon. They were trying to extort Naofumi, really. They figured that he was just going to be that one weak hero out of the four, the one that couldn't really do anything considering the fact that he didn't have a weapon to call his own. At least when it came on to the other heroes, he had a sword, a spear, or a bow, but Naofumi, he just had his hands. And they doubted that he was going to be all that strong. They could probably pull out a weapon or two and then just defeat him right then and there. But they would be deeply mistaken though. Naofumi would entertain them for a little bit, saying, yeah, sure, why don't you guys become part of my party? And they would try to mention how Naofumi ought to buy them some armor first. Naofumi would refuse, and thugs, they would get kind of annoyed. They would try to put a sword onto Naofumi's neck and mention how he was going to give them his money right here and now, or else he dies. Naofumi would just laugh hearing this, mentioning how he was basically dead already. He was dead inside, for crying out loud. And Naofumi would just immediately become intangible. He would phase through the thug, and the thug would have shivers until Naofumi put his hand through the thug's, head, still intangible. Naofumi would mention the fact that he could easily make his arm tangible again at any point, and the thug's brain or head or whatever, it could just go pop like a watermelon being dropped on the floor, pop like a balloon, pop like, you get the point. The thug was beginning to sweat, and Naofumi, he was not joking at all. Naofumi knew exactly what sort of capabilities he had, and he wasn't playing games with this thug. If this thug were to ever try and act up again, he wasn't going to be all that hesitant. Who was he kidding? Yeah, no, Naofumi, he would threaten the thug, and the thug, they would begin to sweat, but they would try and call out Naofumi's bluff, mentioning how, oh, we probably can't do that. And Naofumi, he would laugh. Oh, really, you say? I can't? Naofumi would immediately do exactly the actions he threatened before. This guy decided to push his buttons, and therefore he died. That's literally it. And Naofumi's book. The other thugs would be terrified seeing what Naofumi had just done, and they would try to flee the scene, hoping to inform some knights about this so that they could arrest Naofumi or something. Just get rid of this guy. This guy was a pure monster. This was a monster pretending to be a hero. But Naofumi, he would make sure that no such thing would happen. Naofumi would actually hover above one of the two thugs that were remaining, and he would actually possess their body. Naofumi would end up throwing himself onto the other thug, and the thug, they would be questioning what was wrong with them, what were they doing, they need to get away from this monster. But Naofumi, he would just laugh before mentioning that he was a monster and this guy's body was being taken over. Naofumi would immediately begin to throw punches at this thug on the ground. They would be beaten to a pulp, and Naofumi, he would leave that other thug's body and leave it to be that this thug basically mutilated his own friend. Naofumi would even put the blame onto, Naofumi would even say that, oh, when it came onto this other thug as well, the one whose head is literally blown off. And this thug did it. Look how he beat up his own friend. This guy was purely insane. And what Naofumi was doing right now was just trying to put a stop to this villain. And nobody would actually believe the thug, believe that he was innocent. All of the DNA, all of the evidence seemed to go back to him. And Naofumi, he would just laugh internally as this thug ended up getting arrested for his quote-unquote evil doings. Naofumi knew exactly what actually happened, but he wasn't going to say a word. Oh no! Naofumi was going to have way too much fun in this world. He was going to keep a low profile. Well, maybe a low profile. He wasn't all that sure just yet. Naofumi figured that he could maybe do something along the lines of becoming intangible and then taking over some more people's bodies, maybe even go up to the king at one point, take over his body, and basically rule with an iron fist from there, making it seem as if the king was cruel, and that maybe it would be a good idea to dethrone him or whatever. Naofumi wasn't too sure just yet, but he figured that it could be an interesting thing to do. After all, back in his old world, it wasn't an uncommon thing for Naofumi to take over some pretty powerful people's bodies. That's why he managed to even create World War III at one point. He basically managed to take over his president, the US president's body as well, and then he even managed to get into North Korea at one point, take over some other people's bodies, and although it was a dictatorship over there, when it came on to North Korea, Naofumi would actually even manage to have them be engaged in war with the rest of the world, despite how awful the living conditions were already there. Naofumi never cared. Naofumi just wanted to see the world burn at this point, and this was exactly what he was going to do here as well. Naofumi figured that he also wanted a bit of a change of scenery after a week or two in the capital city of Melromike. So he would decide to actually move out into the villages, where he would discover there were more monsters there, stronger monsters actually, that Naofumi would get a kick out of killing. Naofumi realized just how much action he would get from these monsters, and he would even possess a couple of them as well, just to get an even more exciting fight. Naofumi would go on to even stumble upon a pretty poor village by the name of Loot Village. Apparently this village had been ransacked with monsters during the first wave, and they were still trying to build their way back up to where they originally were, although it probably wasn't going to happen. Let's be honest. Naofumi, he did not take any pity on these people at all. As a matter of fact, Naofumi would just look at these people and he would have literally no reaction. He would just explore the place, curious as to what he going to do here. This place was already pathetic as it is. Basically it was like taking candy from a baby at this point, and where was the fun in that? No, Naofumi couldn't be bothered to really mess with them just yet. Instead, Naofumi would decide to give them false hope, you could say. Give them false hope that they were going to be protected by a hero like Naofumi. Naofumi was going to be the knight in shining armor. He would go on to kill some of the monsters that were ransacking their village, or at least like within the caves. And Naofumi would even bring back some items for the people, all to make it seem as if he was a nice guy, as if he was a good hero, as if he was capable of leading them in the right direction so that they could maybe become a prosperous village. But Naofumi, he had other intentions. He had alternative intentions, really. And really, his intentions were to just give these people a bunch of false hope so he could crush them later on once he began to go on his massacre of sorts, and where he would just destroy everything in his sight. He didn't care how strong the heroes would get after all. Well, he did to an extent. He wanted these heroes to become moderately strong enough so that whenever he did end up fighting them, it was going to be interesting. If the heroes were moderately strong and the people genuinely believed that these other three heroes would be enough to take Naofumi down, it would give Naofumi even more of a kick whenever he would see that the people's hopes would be crushed. He honestly loved that reaction whenever people thought that right when something strong and powerful was going to be capable of taking down Naofumi, the immediate disappointment on their faces, the immediate shock right after they see their only hopes getting crushed by Naofumi, that would give him such a thrill. He enjoyed every moment seeing that, and Naofumi wanted to see that on these people's faces as well. Just see the absolute despair. He ate it all up whenever that happened. So having the heroes become strong or moderately strong was going to be quite an enjoyable thing for Naofumi. Defeating them while they were weak was no fun whatsoever. The people did not have as much hope in the heroes when compared to when they become stronger. After all, it's like this. It's as if you are the protagonist. Well, no. It's as if you are the final boss and you decide to kill the protagonist while they were still at level 1. Yes, it would make sense to do that, but at the same time, what sort of thrill would you get out of that? You have no thrill whatsoever. You go up against somebody who is level 1 and you're level 100. It makes no sense to really even bother trying to fight them if it means that you're not going to get really anything out of it at all. Naofumi would also go on to go back to Melremoik just to find out some stuff. He would end up getting a bit of information about there apparently being this dragon hourglass or whatever, and it apparently told the heroes and well pretty much anybody else when the next wave was going to happen. Now we found that to actually be really convenient. He would realize that the next wave was going to be happening really soon, and the other heroes, they would have actually arrived on the scene as well at this point. They would look at each other's levels at this point, and they would especially pay attention to Naofumi's own, while see the other heroes were around level 20 to 25. Naofumi was at a level 40. That was insane, in their opinions. Just what was Naofumi doing? None of the heroes would have realized what Naofumi's full extent of abilities were. At this point, Naofumi would have unlocked his pyrokinesis completely. His ability to basically take over other people's bodies would have been even more effective at this point as well. He was able to fly at faster speeds. He was able to even sense when monsters were coming around him. It was pretty crazy in Naofumi's opinion, just what he was capable of doing while still at level 40, and knowing that he still had a ways to go. Maybe at level 60 he could unlock, I don't know, maybe his ghostly whale, and at level 100, oh, he didn't even want to imagine what he could do at level 100. It was as if he was getting stronger in this world than he ever did in his own world. And Naofumi, he liked that. He liked that a lot. Ren and Inzuki, they would request to know what sort of training regimen Naofumi was doing in order to become as strong as he is now, but Naofumi, he wouldn't really say anything. If he were to tell them the actual training regimen he went through, they wouldn't believe it. Either that or they were trying to arrest him right then and now, because when it came on to some other things he did, they weren't necessarily just, oh, fight this monster, kill that monster, oh no. Oh no, and when it came on to Naofumi, he was considered to be really sadistic, and where he would even try to take down some humans as well. He was pretty impartial, you could say. Naofumi would try to kill a human, he would try to kill a monster, he would try to hide the human part though. He would usually just try to possess some people in order to have it be believed that, oh, this person actually harmed this other person for whatever reason. And of course, since people couldn't tell that Naofumi was actually possessing them, they would always believe that the possessed person actually was in complete control and that they were just trying to lie or whatever in order to make it seem as if they were innocent. So the people would usually always make it seem as if this person was guilty even more than they were before. They would always put a negative light onto the people that were possessed by Naofumi. And Naofumi, he didn't really mind at all. This was exactly what Naofumi was trying to do, in all honesty. He was trying to create discord among all of the people here. If he could create discord within one community at a time, this could be good. This would lead people to become untrusting of each other. And when it came onto the wave now, the fact that these people weren't going to be working together in order to protect each other against the wave due to the fact that they were untrusting of each other, this was bon appetit for Naofumi. He knew that creating chaos was going to be his key to, well, taking over this world. In all honesty, Naofumi didn't really care about taking over the world, he just wanted to see the world burn, but this was going to be the first step. Create discord among the people so that when the wave started, they would not fight for each other. Instead, they would be too hesitant to even believe that one or another wasn't going to try and backstab them in the end. They were too hesitant to believe each other, and so that was going to be their downfall as soon as the wave started. Once the wave started, Naofumi would immediately start to go ahead and, well, kill many of the monsters. Naofumi would have actually been racking up quite a bit of points throughout the whole of the wave, while the other heroes, they would try to deal with the monsters. Naofumi, well, not the monsters, but more so the boss of the wave, that's what I meant to say. When it came on to Naofumi, while he was killing one of the monsters, Naofumi would also decide to check up on the village, and where he would actually realize that the villagers, they were really struggling here. Many of the villagers, they had zero trust for each other at this point. All of them were too afraid that one of them was just going to be another murderer, and that they were going to kill them as soon as they turned their backs. But they also had to deal with the monsters here, so they had to make a choice, and some of them, they would make the wrong choice, and where they would decide to be too distrustful of each other in order to work together, and that would be the downfall of two people all at once. Naofumi was killing two birds with one stone at this point. Naofumi managed to create quite a bit of distrust within the villagers of Loot Village. And now these monsters, they were basically going ahead killing all of these people as well. Naofumi would decide to step in though once he realized that the knights apparently were also trying to help the villagers in a way, but they ended up actually beginning to burn down the city as well. Not the city, but village. Naofumi found the irony in this, and he would decide to step in, mentioning how he had all of this handled. The soldiers, they could just leave. The soldiers, they would be hesitant, but Naofumi would show them that he was not kidding. He could probably handle all of this by himself, and so the soldiers, they would genuinely believe Naofumi. They would leave the scene, watching from afar for a little bit before going to join other heroes, and Naofumi would go on to kill as many of these monsters as possible. But when the villagers were just about to thank Naofumi would actually kill some of the villagers as well. Some of the villagers, they would be confused. What was Naofumi doing? And Naofumi would reveal the fact that all of this was just a ruse. During the wave, the fact that these people genuinely thought that Naofumi cared for them was hilarious in this book. He didn't care for anybody but himself. That was something that people in his own world realized as well. Nobody but himself. It was a dog eats dog world. Naofumi. He was the announcer in this world apparently as well. Once the villagers heard this, they were terrified. They immediately tried to run from Naofumi, but Naofumi, he would just go on to kill him. He would just go on a murder spree at this point. He would go ahead and kill monsters and humans indiscriminately. He didn't really care about the other heroes at this point. They were too weak to handle him. They were 15 levels or more behind Naofumi, and Naofumi, he could probably take on each of the heroes. He wasn't sure if he could necessarily possess them due to the special qualities of the weapons that they had in this world, but Naofumi was sure that he could probably take them in a fight, and that was exactly what he was planning on doing later on. But Naofumi, he would decide to keep it on a bit of a low level. He would just go ahead and kill all of the villagers within Loot Village, and he would have an incredible joy in this. Naofumi would go on to move around the place and kill some more monsters just to make it look like he was doing something and make it seem as if, he was completely innocent. What happened to the villagers was just due to the monsters or whatever. By the time the wave finished, many people, they would be celebrating the fact that they managed to outdo the wave this time around. The fact that the heroes, they actually managed to protect the people. And of course, Naofumi would even be invited to the after party, to the after party, you could say. Naofumi would actually decline this request though. He wasn't interested in partying, you could say. Naofumi was just interested in becoming stronger. He wanted to become even stronger than the heroes were already. He figured that they managed to get a couple of boosts from this wave as well, but Naofumi, he was still pretty far ahead of them, and that's exactly what he was planning on keeping with. He was planning to always be one step ahead of each of the heroes. He wasn't about to just let them get too confident of their own abilities right now. Well, he wasn't about to just let them overtake him in levels, to be more fair. Naofumi couldn't care less if the other heroes became cocky with their abilities. That would just make it even more hilarious when he actually had to fight them, and the heroes, they weren't pushing as much weight as they claimed to be doing beforehand. Naofumi wanted these guys to brag, really. Naofumi wanted each and every last one of these heroes to brag about their abilities, just so that he could show off in their final battle, or whenever their battle was meant to happen. Naofumi knew that it wasn't ready just yet. These guys were just too weak right now. So Naofumi would go ahead and explore the rest of this world, see what the rest of this world had to offer. And Naofumi would end up finding himself meeting up with a man who was apparently a slave trader, you could say. This guy would offer Naofumi the opportunity to have his own slave. And to that, Naofumi laughed. He liked this guy. Well, he liked this guy's business. He would say that he was willing to take pretty much all of them, in which the slave trader mentioned that was going to be a pretty hefty fee. But Naofumi would mention that he was a hero, that the slave trader, they would mention that yes, they understand, but at the same time, Naofumi still had to. Naofumi would just cut them off and shoot them in the head with an ecto blast. Naofumi would mention that he had no intention of paying this guy. After all, he was a slave trader. Why should he pay this guy anything? In actuality, this guy should be begging him not to report anything. And this guy had the audacity to try and force him to pay. This guy must not know who he was. Naofumi was going to make his name known all throughout this world. And having a couple people that worked under him, he supposed that wasn't going to be all that bad. Maybe. Having them basically be forced to be part of his party or whatever, if they wanted to survive in what was going to be, well, I can't even describe it in any other words besides an apocalypse, you could say. Basically, Naofumi was going to create a dystopian society by the end of this, and to have some people who worshipped him, some people who were part of his party, and basically be at the very top, commanding this world. Yeah, and well, not even really commanding, just leading the rest of his army, or whatever army he managed to build within this time, if he didn't just decide to kill off any and all humans or whatever. Naofumi still had to eat after all. Naofumi's whole thing was that he was going to destroy most of this world, but right now, Naofumi was focused on maybe creating a party so that he could add to his own strength. Having more people as part of his party could maybe help with his development. Who knows, maybe he could develop even faster than before. Sure, these guys, they may have had parties, but they didn't develop as fast as Naofumi. But Naofumi figured that these heroes, they probably still managed to have a boost from having more party members as part of their group. That meant that they were sharing some leveling up abilities or whatever. Naofumi figured that he could do the same here. Maybe, just maybe, having these guys fight could add to his own base level. And Naofumi, he was not opposed to this idea at all. So this was the main reason why he would even take up some slaves in the first place. Part of this group would involve having a sick girl, a sick demi-human by the name of Raftalia, who Naofumi would easily corrupt though. In all honesty, Naofumi really just went with Raftalia, all the rest he literally just killed. Naofumi figured that this girl would be easy to manipulate, easy to take over control, lend her basically turn her into his puppet of the sorts, so that she could also cause havoc. And he wouldn't develop that close of a relationship to her either. He didn't want to get attached to anybody in this world, because he made that mistake in his old world, in his own world, when it came on to his parents. Rule number 1 when it came on to being a villain: never, ever become attached to anyone. And Naofumi would keep that to heart. When it came on to Raftalia, she was scared of Naofumi, the pure power that he held. Naofumi would just look at the girl and inform her of the fact that this world was going to be dangerous. Now, whether or not she wanted to stay in this cage or help him was really up to her. Naofumi would give her the option between helping Naofumi when it came on to dealing with this world and having to go through some of the hardships, or stay in this cage. Raftalia would think about it for a second before deciding to go with Naofumi. She didn't want to be stuck in this cage full of corpses with horrible smells. Smells that would overwhelm her, and the amount of nightmares that she was already having. How could this get any worse? Raphtalia would be in for a rude awakening though. But yeah, that's where I'm going to be ending it for right now. It is your boy King Tyrenex out. You guys already know the deal. If you like the video, go ahead, like, subscribe. You guys know the deal. Share the video too. But yeah, oh yeah, and leave a comment. But besides that, I got nothing else to say. Peace.